At its absolute baseline, human survival is a relentless, exhausting mechanical hustle. You are a highly unstable tower of biology, burning fuel at an astonishing rate just to avoid cooling down to the ambient temperature of a freezing universe. Long ago, the chaos found a way to lock itself in. It built a fragile cell wall to hold on to heat, actively fighting back against the void. Everything you do is built on top of that exact same physical engine. Look at a man casually walking down a concrete stairwell on his morning commute. He is completely unaware of the heavy biological machinery operating under his skin, just to keep his face off the floor. If he actually waited for light to hit his retinas, travel to the back of his skull, and send a signal down his spine to tell his leg muscles to contract, he would already be bleeding at the bottom of the stairs. Biological wiring is simply too slow. Reality happens much faster than wet tissue can process it. To solve that lag, the brain stops waiting for reality. Instead, it builds a ghost map. Look at how this wireframe grid actively projects the physical space out into the dark. The brain calculates the depth of the steps and hallucinates a blueprint of the immediate future, sending instructions to the body a fraction of a second before the meat actually touches the concrete. But watch what happens when the hallucination fails. If the man looks at his phone and his brain loses count of the steps, it confidently projects a drop that does not exist. It prepares the muscles to catch his weight on a lower elevation and drives his skeletal structure straight into the flat landing early. The physical penalty is immediate and brutal. A massive, jarring shock travels straight up his heel. It violently rattles his spine and causes his stomach to drop as he wildly flails his arms to catch his balance. That sudden shock in his chest is not an emotion. He didn't trip over a rock. He tripped over a miscalculation. The jolt is a violent mathematical friction occurring entirely because the internal system guessed the future incorrectly. Because being wrong in the wild is usually fatal, the hardware panics. The system immediately dumps a lethal dose of adrenaline into his bloodstream, forcing the organism to stop reading the phone and pay attention to the physical threat. Human consciousness begins as this desperate gamble. Every quiet moment of your life is quietly regulated by a physical survival loop, constantly forced to guess the future just to keep your biological foundation from cracking under the weight of reality. Navigating a stairwell requires a relatively simple hallucination, but moving through a dense, chaotic crowd on a busy city sidewalk requires a masterpiece of fluid dynamics. To avoid collisions, the brain acts as a fluid dynamic supercomputer. It passively registers the exact walking speeds of dozens of strangers, calculating their trajectories based on entirely invisible cues, a slight dip in a shoulder or a wandering gaze, to adjust your own velocity by a fraction of a mile per hour. Then the math breaks. A tourist walking 10 feet ahead abruptly stops dead in the middle of the flow. The trajectory instantly collapses. The body has to violently hit the brakes, shifting its weight hard to kill the momentum. The internal radar screams at the sudden data error. The physical tension spikes so high that the biological machine can no longer operate in silence. A sudden surge of completely irrational, hot primate rage floods the chest. A highly complex organism cannot survive feeling like a helpless passenger in a blind, vibrating furnace. The machinery requires a manager to contain the panic. A fraction of a second later, a voice wakes up right behind your eyes. It invents a story. It tells you that the tourist is an absolute idiot. It takes the scattered pieces, the tension, the reaction, and arranges them into something that feels like intention. It tells you a story where events follow from reasons, a clean narrative laid over a messy process. We experience this as a rational, conscious observation. We think we are fully conscious agents making deliberate choices, but we are actually just listening to our own internal public relations department, writing the subtitles to a biological reaction that already happened completely in the dark. This ancient architecture works flawlessly when dodging concrete stairs or clumsy tourists, but a fatal flaw appears when we place those highly paranoid biological wires into a perfectly safe room and hand them a digital screen. We carry a threat calibration system that chronically defaults to speed over accuracy. It operates as an OR gate, meaning that if even one strong signal trips the wire, the system skips the gathering of evidence and treats the disruption as an immediate physical threat. Psychologists call this response the need for cognitive closure. Under pressure, human beings lose their tolerance for ambiguity. The brain suddenly demands a definite, immediate answer, spiking the need for a finalized story before the evidence has even finished arriving. Now introduce an abstract trigger, a text message from a manager saying, "See me immediately," or a notification from a banking app showing your available balance instantly dropping to zero. Look at the environmental reality of that moment. The phone is just a piece of glass. Not a single atom in the physical room has changed. The ambient temperature on the skin is exactly the same, and there is absolutely no physical predator in the room. But the internal narrator receives that tiny, silent packet of light and unzips it into a complete catastrophe. The brain hallucinates a reality where the lost money means a lost home, lost heat, and eventual starvation. That fictional narrative violently hijacks the biological furnace. The physical misfire is absolute. Blood physically drains from the digestive system to conserve power. The heart rate doubles. The organism prepares for a fight to the death over an invisible, abstract piece of math. This exact same mechanism scales up to the rest of society. Sudden moral outrage or political panic online is just a brutal, uncalibrated autoimmune disease. The brain detects a harmless pattern of pixels that violates its worldview and reacts to those ideas exactly as if they are physical poison. There is no grand, universally programmed destiny operating under the surface. You are a highly unstable tower of biology, running a 14 billion-year-old error correction code. Every breath, every flinch, and every argument is just a terrified physical engine, desperately spinning stories to keep the chaos locked safely outside the cell wall.